Marcus Thompson was known as one of the most promising executives at Sterling & Comer, a prestigious consulting firm. He had risen through the ranks with hard work, determination, and an uncanny ability to solve problems that others found insurmountable. At just 34 years old, he was already leading major projects and earning accolades from clients across industries. But Marcus wasn't just celebrated for his professional achievements. He carried himself with humility and grace, making him well-liked by many colleagues. Despite his success, Marcus often felt like an outsider in the corporate world. As one of the few black executives in a predominantly white company, he knew all too well what it meant to stand out. Not always for his talent, but sometimes simply because of how he looked. Still, Marcus chose not to dwell on these feelings. Instead, he focused on proving himself every day, determined to break barriers quietly and effectively. That morning, Marcus arrived early at the office, clutching a folder filled with detailed reports and data analysis for the quarterly review meeting. This particular meeting was critical. It would determine whether Sterling & Co. secured a multi-million-dollar contract with Apex Innovations, a tech giant looking to expand its operations globally. Marcus had spent weeks preparing, poring over spreadsheets late into the night and refining strategies until they were flawless. His confidence was high, though tinged with nerves. After all, this wasn't just another presentation. It was a chance to showcase his leadership skills to senior management. As Marcus entered the conference room, he noticed the usual suspects, senior partners seated around the long mahogany table, their expressions ranging from indifferent to mildly curious. Among them was Richard Hayes, the CEO, whose piercing gaze seemed to scrutinize everyone who dared speak up. Richard was known for being tough but fair, or so people said. However, Marcus couldn't help but feel a knot forming in his stomach. Whenever Richard's eyes landed on him, the meeting began smoothly enough. Presentations droned on about financial projections and market trends, topics Marcus had mastered years ago. When it was finally his turn to present, Marcus stood up confidently, his voice steady as he outlined his strategy for securing the Apex deal. For the first 10 minutes, everything went according to plan. Colleagues nodded approvingly, jotting down notes as Marcus spoke passionately about innovation and growth opportunities. But then, something shifted. One of the senior partners, Greg Morrison, interrupted Marcus mid-sentence. "Hold on," Greg said, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "Are you sure this approach is realistic? It seems ambitious, even for someone like you." The phrase, "someone like you," hung heavily in the air, dripping with condescension. Murmurs rippled through the room, some sympathetic, others amused. Marcus paused, taken aback by the blatant disrespect. He glanced around the table, searching for allies, but most avoided eye contact altogether. Even Richard Hayes remained silent, allowing the moment to stretch uncomfortably. Though Marcus wanted to defend himself, he bit back his initial response, choosing instead to maintain his composure. Little did anyone know, this humiliation wouldn't be the end of the story. It was merely the beginning. Unbeknownst to the room full of doubters, Marcus had more than just facts and figures tucked away in his folder. What he revealed later would leave everyone speechless and change the course of his career forever. The room fell silent after Greg Morrison's cutting remark. Marcus felt the weight of every pair of eyes on him, some curious, others judgmental, and a few laced with pity. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to take a deep breath. He couldn't let this moment define him. Not here, not now. Still, the sting of Greg's words lingered, as if they had been designed to undermine not just his strategy, but also his very presence in that room. Greg leaned forward slightly, his tone dripping with smug superiority. "I mean, Marcus," he continued, deliberately drawing out the pause before saying Marcus's name. "You've done great work so far, sure, but Apex Innovations is a massive client. Are we really ready to gamble their trust on something so unconventional?" Marcus clenched his jaw tightly, refusing to let his frustration show. He knew exactly what Greg was doing, questioning his competence while masking it as concern for the company. It wasn't the first time Marcus had faced subtle jabs like, This during meetings, though none had ever been quite so public or pointed. What made it worse was the lack of support from anyone else in the room. Not even Richard Hayes, who sat at the head of the table, intervened to steer the conversation back to professionalism. Instead, Richard chimed in with a question that only added fuel to the fire. "Marcus," he said, his voice calm yet probing, "can you explain why you chose such an aggressive timeline? Do you think it's feasible given our current resources?" The implication was clear. Richard doubted Marcus's judgment. Whether it was intentional or not, Marcus couldn't tell, but the cumulative effect of these comments was undeniable. For a brief moment, Marcus considered stepping down from the presentation altogether. His mind raced with thoughts of walking out of the room, leaving behind the humiliation and the suffocating tension. But then he remembered why he was there. To prove himself, yes, but more importantly, to deliver results for the company. Giving up wasn't an option. Summoning every ounce of self-control, Marcus responded politely but firmly. "Thank you for raising those concerns, Greg and Richard," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "Let me clarify my reasoning." Over the next several minutes, Marcus walked them through his analysis again, highlighting key data points and explaining how his proposed strategy aligned perfectly with Apex Innovations' goals. He spoke with precision, ensuring each word carried authority and conviction. But no matter how compelling his arguments were, the skepticism in the room remained palpable. Some nodded along half-heartedly, while others exchanged skeptical glances. By the time Marcus finished speaking, the atmosphere felt heavier than before. Instead of applause or acknowledgement, there was silence, a deafening kind that confirmed Marcus's worst fears. They didn't believe in him. As Marcus returned to his seat, he could feel the heat rising in his cheeks. The embarrassment burned deep within him, threatening to overshadow the pride he'd once felt about his hard work. He tried to focus on the remaining presentations, but his mind kept replaying the scene over and over again. Had he missed something? Was his plan truly flawed? Or were they simply unwilling to see its potential because of who he was? By the end of the meeting, Marcus barely registered the polite applause as the session concluded. Colleagues filed out of the room one by one, chatting casually about lunch plans or weekend getaways. No one approached Marcus to offer reassurance or even acknowledge what had happened. Even those who respected him seemed hesitant to engage, perhaps fearing association with someone who had just been publicly questioned. Sitting alone at the conference table, Marcus stared blankly at the folder in front of him. Inside it lay not only his meticulously crafted proposal but also something else, a secret weapon he hadn't revealed yet. As the echoes of doubt swirled around him, Marcus realized this moment was bigger than any single meeting. This wasn't just about proving his worth to Sterling & Co. It was about standing up for himself when no one else would, and he knew exactly how to do it. When the next opportunity came, Marcus wouldn't hold back. As the conference room emptied, Marcus remained seated, his hands resting on the polished mahogany table. The weight of the meeting still pressed heavily on him, but beneath the surface something stirred, a quiet resolve that refused to let him succumb to despair. He had faced challenges before, moments when people underestimated him or dismissed his ideas outright. But this time felt different. This wasn't just about a single setback, it was about proving that he belonged in that room, and deserved to be heard. Marcus opened the folder in front of him and flipped through its contents. There, tucked neatly behind the charts and graphs, was a document he hadn't shared during the presentation. It wasn't part of the official report, nor was it something anyone else at Sterling & Co. had seen. This was his personal research, compiled over countless late nights and weekends, driven by a gut feeling that there was more to the Apex Innovations deal than what met the eye. What Marcus had uncovered could change everything, not just for the company, but for how others perceived him. Yet sharing it now would require courage. Revealing this information meant stepping into uncharted territory, exposing himself to scrutiny and potential backlash. But Marcus knew one thing for certain: staying silent wasn't an option anymore. He glanced at his watch. There were 2 hours until his next scheduled task, a follow-up call with Apex Innovations' senior leadership team. That call was supposed to be routine, a chance to clarify minor details from the morning's presentation. But Marcus decided, then and there, that it wouldn't stay routine. If no one believed in him, he'd have to make them believe. And if they doubted his strategy, he'd give them undeniable proof of its value. Over the next hour, Marcus retreated to his office, closing the door firmly behind him. He needed space to think, to refine his approach. Sitting at his desk, he reviewed the hidden document once again. It contained insights gleaned from months of studying Apex Innovations' internal reports, data that even Sterling & Co.'s top analysts hadn't fully grasped. Marcus had pieced together patterns indicating that the tech giant was on the verge of a major shift in its business model. If Sterling acted quickly, leveraging Marcus's proposed timeline, they could position themselves as indispensable partners in Apex's expansion plans. But revealing this information came with risks. For starters, Marcus had obtained some of these insights unofficially, tapping into industry networks and connections he'd built over years. While none of it violated ethical boundaries, explaining his methods might raise eyebrows among his colleagues. Would they see his resourcefulness as brilliance or as overstepping? Doubts crept into Marcus's mind, but he pushed them aside. This wasn't just about winning the Apex contract. It was about asserting his worth in a system that often overlooked people like him. He thought back to his childhood, growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and dreams were often dismissed. His parents had taught him never to settle for less than he deserved, no matter how hard the journey might be. Their words echoed in his ears now. You don't wait for someone to hand you respect. You earn it. With renewed determination, Marcus began drafting a concise summary of his findings. He included key takeaways that even skeptics couldn't ignore: projected revenue increases, competitive advantages, and alignment with Apex's long-term vision. Each sentence was crafted carefully, balancing professionalism with clarity. By the time he finished, Marcus felt a flicker of confidence returning. He knew the stakes were high, but he also knew he had the tools to turn things around. When the clock struck 2 p.m., Marcus stood up, straightened his tie, and grabbed the folder containing both his original proposal and the new document. He walked toward the conference room where the call with Apex was set to begin, feeling a mix of nerves and anticipation. Whatever happened next, he was ready to face it head-on. Little did Marcus know, the events of the next hour would not only redefine his career, but also challenge everyone's assumptions, including his own. The conference room was quiet as Marcus entered, his folder firmly in hand. The large screen at the front of the room displayed the Apex Innovations logo, and a countdown timer indicated that the call would start in just a few minutes. Marcus took a seat at the head of the table, positioning himself to lead the discussion, this time. He glanced around the room, noticing that only a handful of senior executives had joined him, a stark contrast to the packed crowd earlier that morning. Among them were Richard Hayes and Greg Morrison, both looking distracted as they scrolled through emails on their phones. Marcus felt a pang of nervousness, but quickly reminded himself why he was there. This wasn't about seeking approval anymore. It was about proving the value of his ideas and showing everyone what he was truly capable of. As the timer hit 0, the screen flickered to life, revealing 3 members of Apex's leadership team seated in their own sleek boardroom. Their expressions were neutral, professional, but Marcus could sense an underlying curiosity. They weren't here for small talk. They wanted results. Good afternoon, Marcus began, his voice steady and confident. Thank you all for taking the time to connect today. I'd like to dive right into some key insights we've uncovered regarding your upcoming expansion plans. Greg Morrison raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by Marcus's assertiveness. Richard Hayes leaned forward, slightly, his attention now fully on Marcus. No one interrupted, so Marcus pressed on. As you know, our initial proposal outlined a timeline designed to align with your strategic goals. However, during my research, I discovered additional opportunities that could significantly enhance the impact of this partnership. With that, Marcus opened his folder and handed out printed copies of his findings to those in the room, while simultaneously sharing his screen with the Apex team. On the display appeared charts and graphs detailing trends Marcus had identified, patterns that suggested Apex was poised to enter a new phase of innovation-driven growth. His analysis included projections showing how Sterling and Cohen's resources could accelerate their timeline by 6 months, giving them a critical edge over competitors. The data was compelling, backed by real-world examples from other tech giants who had successfully executed similar strategies. One of the Apex executives, a woman named Sandra Klein, leaned forward, her interest visibly piqued. "This is intriguing," she said, her tone measured but intrigued. "Can you elaborate on how you arrived at these conclusions?" Marcus nodded, ready for the question. "Certainly," he replied. "I cross-referenced public statements from your CEO, recent product launches, and industry reports to identify shifts in consumer demand. These indicators suggest that moving faster will not only meet market expectations but also position Apex as a leader in emerging technologies." Sandra exchanged glances with her colleagues before turning back to Marcus. "We hadn't considered that angle," she admitted. "It's bold, but if executed properly, it could be transformative." Greg Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly unsettled by the positive reaction from the Apex team. Richard Hayes, however, remained silent, his expression unreadable. Marcus could feel the dynamics shifting in the room. For the first time that day, he wasn't the one being doubted. He was the one driving the conversation. But Marcus wasn't done yet. Sensing the momentum, he decided to take another step. "There's one more thing I'd like to share," he said, pausing dramatically. On the screen, he pulled up a final slide featuring a detailed roadmap tailored specifically for Apex. "This isn't just a theoretical plan, it's actionable. And with your support, we can make it happen." For a moment, the room fell silent. Then Sandra broke into a smile. "Mr. Thompson, you've certainly given us something to think about. We'll need to review this internally, but I must say, this changes things." As the call wrapped up, Marcus felt a surge of pride. He had turned what could have been a routine follow-up into a pivotal moment. But as he gathered his materials and prepared to leave the room, he noticed Greg glaring at him with thinly veiled resentment. Richard, on the other hand, gave him a long, thoughtful look, one that hinted at respect but also uncertainty. Marcus knew this victory was far from complete. While he had won over the Apex team, convincing his own colleagues might prove even harder. Still, he walked out of the room with his head held high, knowing he had planted seeds that would soon bloom into something extraordinary. The buzz of success from the Apex call lingered in Marcus's mind as he returned to his office. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to savor the small victory. Sandra Klein's approving nod and the intrigued expressions of the Apex executives replayed in his thoughts like a highlight reel. He had done what many would have thought impossible, turning doubt into opportunity and skepticism into admiration. But as Marcus sat down at his desk, reality began to settle in. Winning over Apex was one thing, convincing his own colleagues was another challenge entirely. Word of Marcus's bold presentation spread quickly through Sterling & Co., though not always in ways that pleased him. By late afternoon, whispers filled the hallways. Some praised his initiative, calling it brilliant and exactly what we needed. Others, however, were less charitable. Greg Morrison, in particular, seemed determined to undermine Marcus's efforts. During an impromptu hallway conversation with a group of senior analysts, Greg casually remarked, "I'm sure Marcus meant well, but I hope he didn't overpromise. You know how eager some people can get." Marcus overheard the comment as he passed by, pretending not to notice. Still, the words stung. They weren't just criticism. They were a reminder of the barriers he still faced within the company. Despite his accomplishments, there were those who refused to see him as anything more than an outsider, trying too hard to fit in. Later that evening, Richard Hayes called Marcus into his office. The CEO's spacious corner room overlooked the city skyline, its glass walls reflecting the fading sunlight. Richard gestured for Marcus to sit, his demeanor calm but unreadable. "Marcus," he began, leaning back in his chair, "you surprised me today. That was Impressive work with Apex. Marcus nodded, unsure where this was heading. Praise from Richard was rare, and when it came, it often carried an unspoken caveat. "Thank you, sir," he replied cautiously. "I believed it was important to show them our full potential." Richard studied him for a moment before continuing. "But tell me something. How did you come across all that data? Some of it wasn't part of the official materials we prepared." Marcus had anticipated this question. He chose his words carefully. "I've been following Apex closely for months now, analyzing their public statements and connecting the dots between their strategic moves. It's about seeing beyond the numbers and understanding the bigger picture." Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed but also cautious. "It's risky going off script like that. If something goes wrong, the responsibility falls squarely on you." "I understand the risk, sir," Marcus responded firmly. "But I also believe that playing it safe won't get us where we need to be. We're competing against firms that aren't afraid to innovate. Why should we hold back?" For a long moment, Richard said nothing. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You're right. We do need to push boundaries, but remember, Marcus, leadership isn't just about having good ideas. It's about earning trust. And trust takes time." The message was clear. While Richard appreciated Marcus's ambition, he wasn't ready to fully endorse him yet. Marcus left the office feeling conflicted. On one hand, he had earned a measure of respect from the CEO, a significant step forward. On the other hand, the road ahead remained fraught with challenges. That night, as Marcus reviewed his notes at home, he reflected on the day's events. He knew he couldn't rely solely on external validation to prove his worth. His colleagues' skepticism wouldn't vanish overnight, no matter how many wins he secured. What mattered most was staying true to himself and continuing to deliver results. And then, as he flipped through the pages of his research, an idea struck him. There was one final piece of information he hadn't shared during the Apex call, a revelation so compelling that it could silence even his harshest critics. It was risky, yes, but Marcus realized it might be the key to changing everything, not just for him, but for everyone at Sterling & Co. With renewed determination, Marcus grabbed his pen and started drafting a plan. Tomorrow he would make sure the world saw exactly what he was capable of, and why they should never underestimate him again. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the office earlier than usual. He carried with him a sense of purpose that radiated from every step he took. His mind was clear, his strategy meticulously mapped out. Today wasn't just another day. It was the day Marcus intended to solidify his place at Sterling & Co., not as someone who had stumbled upon success, but as a leader whose vision couldn't be ignored. By mid-morning, Marcus called for an impromptu meeting with Richard Hayes and the executive team. Though it was unusual for a mid-level executive to request such a gathering without prior approval, Marcus knew timing was everything. The Apex deal was still fresh in everyone's minds, and he needed to act while momentum was on his side. To his relief, Richard agreed, intrigued by Marcus's insistence. As the executives filed into the conference room, Marcus stood at the front, his folder open and ready. This time there was no hesitation in his posture or voice. "Thank you all for joining me," he began, addressing the group with calm authority. "I wanted to share something important, something that ties directly into our work with Apex. Innovations." Greg Morrison crossed his arms, clearly skeptical. "More surprises, Marcus. I hope this is worth our time." Ignoring the jab, Marcus pressed forward. "When I was preparing for the Apex call, I uncovered additional insights that I believe will redefine how we approach this partnership and potentially other clients moving forward." With that, he turned on the projector, displaying a series of documents and charts that hadn't been part of any previous presentation. What followed was nothing short of astonishing. Marcus revealed that during his independent research, he had identified a major vulnerability in Apex's current supply chain, a flaw so significant that it could derail their entire expansion plan if left unaddressed. Worse yet, Apex seemed unaware of the issue. Using data from industry reports and internal communications, all obtained ethically, Marcus demonstrated how Sterling & Co. could not only help Apex avoid disaster, but also position themselves as indispensable problem solvers. This isn't speculation, Marcus explained, pointing to specific figures on the screen. It's a pattern that's already affecting smaller projects within Apex. If we act now, we can offer them a solution before the problem escalates. The room fell silent. Even Greg Morrison uncrossed his arms, his skepticism replaced by stunned disbelief. Richard Hayes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the projections. "How did you find this?" he asked, his tone sharp but curious. "I pieced it together from publicly available information and connections I've built over the years," Marcus replied confidently. "Sometimes, seeing the bigger picture means looking beyond what's handed to us." For several moments, no one spoke. Then Sandra Klein's voice crackled through the speakerphone. They had patched her in remotely after Marcus requested her presence. "Marcus," she said, her tone serious, "this changes everything. You're absolutely right. We hadn't caught this yet. Thank you for bringing it to our attention." Richard stood up slowly, his expression a mix of admiration and disbelief. "Marcus," he said, his voice firm, "you've proven today that your instincts are invaluable, but let me make one thing clear. Actions like these require trust. Trust takes time to build. But you've earned mine today." As the meeting concluded, Marcus felt a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time, he saw genuine respect in the eyes of his colleagues, not just for his intelligence but for his courage and dedication. Yet deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but Marcus was ready. He had shown them who he truly was, a visionary unwilling to settle for anything less than excellence. And as he walked out of the room, he realized something else. He wasn't fighting alone anymore. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's revelation became a turning point not just for his career but for Sterling & Co. as a whole. The company moved swiftly to address the vulnerability in Apex's supply chain, presenting a comprehensive solution that left the tech giant deeply impressed. Sandra Klein personally thanked Marcus during a follow-up call, acknowledging that his insight had likely saved them millions in potential losses. "You didn't just secure this deal," she said warmly. "You've earned our trust for the long haul." Word of Marcus's success spread quickly throughout the industry. Articles began appearing in business journals, praising his innovative approach and ability to think outside the box. Colleagues who once doubted him now approached him with newfound respect and even admiration. Greg Morrison, though reluctant at first, eventually admitted during a team meeting, "I underestimated you, Marcus. I won't make that mistake again." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was close enough. Richard Hayes took things a step further. He promoted Marcus to Vice President of Strategic Partnerships, giving him oversight of key accounts and projects across the firm. In announcing the decision, Richard emphasized Marcus's unique blend of analytical skill, creativity, and leadership. "Marcus has shown us what it means to lead with vision and integrity," Richard told the staff during an all-hands meeting. "He's not just thinking about today, he's building for tomorrow." But perhaps the most profound change wasn't in how others saw Marcus. It was in how he saw himself. For years, Marcus had carried the weight of being the only one, in so many rooms, feeling like he had to work twice as hard to prove himself. Now, standing in front of his colleagues as a newly appointed VP, he realized something important. He no longer needed validation from those who doubted him. His worth wasn't defined by their opinions. It was rooted in his own resilience, talent, and determination. Marcus also made it a priority to mentor younger employees, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds. He understood better than anyone what it felt like to be overlooked or dismissed and wanted to ensure others wouldn't face the same struggles alone. During one-on-one meetings, he shared stories of his journey, not just the victories but also the setbacks, and encouraged his mentees to embrace challenges as opportunities for growth. "Don't let anyone tell you where your limits are," he often said. "Only you get to decide how far you can go." As months turned into years, Marcus continued to rise within Sterling & Co., eventually becoming one of its most influential leaders. Under his guidance, the company adopted more inclusive hiring practices and launched initiatives aimed at fostering diversity and innovation. Clients praised Marcus not only for his strategic brilliance, but also for his ability to inspire teams to achieve greatness. Yet despite his achievements, Marcus never forgot where he came from. On quiet evenings, he would sit in his office overlooking the city skyline, reflecting on the boy who grew up believing anything was possible if he worked hard enough. That belief had carried him through every challenge, every moment of doubt. And now, sitting at the pinnacle of success, Marcus knew one thing for certain. The journey wasn't just about reaching the top. It was about lifting others along the way. When asked in interviews about his secret to success, Marcus always gave the same answer. It's not about proving people wrong, it's about proving yourself right. Trust your instincts, stay true to your values, and remember that no obstacle is bigger than your determination to overcome it. And so, Marcus Thompson's story became more than just a tale of triumph. It became a legacy of courage, perseverance, and unwavering faith in